All right, so thank you to everyone for being here. Thank you, Dr. Feather, for being here. For those of you that don't know, Dr. Tolbert Feather has been the town arborist at Somerset since 2010. And as an expert in arboriculture and someone that's been working in Somerset for almost 15 years, there's really no one better to talk to than Dr. Feather about trees and the environment in Somerset. So I'm going to go ahead and just kick it off to ask you some questions. Can you tell us about your background and how you became an arborist?
Well, I have a degree in a PhD degree in plant pathology.
Mhm.
So I worked with palm trees in California for my dissertation, fungal disease. And then my wife got her job. We met going to school at UC Riverside. And then my wife got her job at NIH as a scientist. And we moved out here in '81. Then I worked for the Maryland Department of Agriculture for 4 years. And I learned all the trees. That's how I learned all the trees here. I come from New Mexico and California. I didn't know anything when I came here.
Interesting.
And we lived in an apartment. We lived in Grosvenor Apartments on Rockville Pike.
Yeah.
And then we lived on a high enough floor that you could see all the forest around.
Oh, wow.
So once I got here, I wasn't going to leave him. I just loved the place.
It's a perfect spot.
So then I learned about all the trees and the names and diseases and stuff in the state, working for the state. And I resigned I was the plant pathologist for the Department of Agriculture. I resigned and started my own business.
Mhm.
And the principal concept was integrated pest management, which was just the University of Maryland entomology department was one of the foremost research places for integrated pest management for landscape plants. And I decided to make that central in a business for landscape installation and maintenance. And so I worked, my first big client was in Crystal City, Charles E. Smith Company.
Okay.
We're building new buildings adjacent to where the airport is. And Mr. Smith liked to start with big trees. So it was high-end landscaping and it was on roof decks. And so I got into that because they had one of them fail. I figured out why it failed.
Okay.
So then what I do is I was reviewing plans to make sure they had the right plants that were adaptable and would have least pests and diseases, and then follow it through on the installation, make sure everything got installed right, and then oversee the maintenance. So I did that for a bunch of properties for them. Then I got in at the airport at National. I did the same thing for them. And then Dulles was next. And then also we do the toll road, which is operated by the airport.
Yeah.
And before I got to the airport, I started working for the town of Chevy Chase.
Okay.
And that was for Dutch elm disease, like starting a program for Dutch elm disease in Chevy Chase.
What is Dutch elm disease?
Dutch elm disease is carried by a beetle, and it's a fungus. When the beetle feeds on the bark, it gets into the tree and it infects the vascular system.
Okay.
And essentially denies water to the top of the tree, and the trees die.
Okay.
So, and that was something that started in the '60s, and everybody had planted elm trees, pretty much monoculture on streets. So there were whole streets bare from this disease. It just would go through, especially in the Midwest.
Is it still a major problem, or is it kind of going away?
What happened is when I first started in the late '80s, it was still a problem. There were trees getting it, and there were still some large elms. Within 5 or 6 years, the disease pressure went down, and it wasn't as prevalent. And we never did any treatments over there, and we still have elm trees there. So after a while, when disease increases and then decreases, as you get less host, you're killing more trees, then the disease incidence go down. Same with Emerald ash borers, I've noticed it's kind of going down now too.
Okay.
So that's an insight. So after Town Chevy Chase, I work here in the village.
Mhm.
Started the art consulting arborist, and then section 5, I'm consulting arborist, Chevy Chase View, and Town of Chevrolet, I'm consulting arborist. And the only reason there's consulting arborist, I oversee the maintenance of all the public trees.
Yeah.
But a big part of needing somebody like me is because of all the ordinances.
Mhm.
So you have tree protection plans for construction and have review for tree removal. So that essentially is how I got started at the town. They started passing ordinances.
Okay, interesting.
And then you have a business going. There's
Yeah.
enough work to sustain you.
Yeah. Have you, working for different municipalities, have you noticed any major differences, or you say it's?
It's interesting. Every area is different.
Okay.
And I mean, the personality of the people there, and it's very interesting how it.
The atmosphere and the
Yeah,
environment.
yes, it's very different.
Okay.
So but that's a lot of fun.
Yeah. So the next question I have is, so you do provide our town with a tree planting list. I was wondering what your approach is to managing tree canopy and ensuring diversity among tree species here in Somerset.
When I started working for Section 5 and Chevy Chase View, the people there had planted nothing but sugar maples.
Okay.
So, and then they didn't plant the varietal ones, they planted the straight ones. And they're nice trees, but they're not very adapted to heat. So a lot of those we've been taken down. So that's well, there's too many of them. So when I started with the town here and the municipality, we and that in the industry, that was a trend to start to diversify. People like to have all one tree down a street because it looks good.
Yeah.
But if like Dutch elm disease, if something comes and gets that tree, all the trees are gone. So it's better to diversify, and I try to keep it diverse.
Yeah.
Tree, I'll have sections where they're the same tree, but I try to keep it diversified. We use all native species here, and most of them are adaptable to street planting. Like I'll only plant American beech tree where you have a wide median or openings,
Okay.
like where there's not a sidewalk or
Yeah.
because they need more room. But a lot of trees are adaptable to the narrow median. And we pretty much do what we're doing is replacement. As we lose trees, we're replacing.
Yeah.
That's most of the program. There's not too many new spaces in town. Interesting, in Chevrolet, they hadn't planted for years, so there was lots of new spaces there. When I started in the town of Chevy Chase, there were many vacant spaces, and it takes years to finally fill everything up. But this town's always been conscious of replanting as trees would be removed.
Okay. So would you say within the 15 years you've been here, the tree population in Somerset has evolved, become more diverse?
On the street, yes.
Okay.
In the woods, it's mainly tulip poplar and beech and oak.
Okay.
So, and then we try to vary that on the street.
So out of curiosity, what do you think is the best way to learn more about trees? If someone like myself, who I don't know the name of really any trees, if I wanted to, maybe some apps.
No. There's apps now, plant identification app. There's a photo app where you can take a picture and it'll give you an idea.
Yeah.
I don't
Or
know
when you first started out,
there was nothing.
Yeah. Well, so how did
When I
that
first started out with books.
books? So you just
I
read
mean,
Sunday
there
books?
wasn't even internet when I started out.
Yeah.
So, and now with the internet, there's keys on the internet.
Yeah.
There's resources on the internet for trees. What I use a lot now is Missouri Botanical Garden website, and also there's a good extension website is North Carolina State has a good landscape information for landscape trees.
And when you identify a tree, like what are the things you're mostly looking at that you can tell? Like the trees, because obviously a lot of trees can look very similar.
If
What's
you
the
have
big
experience, the bark tells you a lot.
The bark. Oh, interesting.
I mean,
Bark.
that's if you've been doing it a long time.
Yeah.
And then after that, you look at the structure and the leaves.
Okay, that's interesting. I would.
There are some that I'm stumped at, some of the ornamentals that are not native. Sometimes I'll have trouble with those, and I'll look through a key.
Yeah.
Another good key is Virginia Tech has a great key
Okay.
for all trees, and they have good descriptions too. So it's called Virginia Tech Dendrology. If you type that on Google, it comes up.
Great. So I have two questions for you, and I'm really interested about because it's definitely very important and applies to Somerset. Can you explain the process of pruning a tree and why that's important?
The main reason we maintain trees on the street is to keep them safe. So large trees naturally shed branches because they're shaded by the upper branches. So there's always some dead wood on a tree, or it could be stress, but a lot of times it's just self-shading. So periodically you have to come through and take all the dead wood out so it doesn't fall on cars or people.
Yeah.
And then for smaller trees, we structural prune to get them in the right shape as they're growing.
Okay.
So that's on smaller trees. Mainly what you're looking for on the street and in the parks is just dead wood and maybe hazards that appear. There's hollows and stuff that you need to look for in case you have to decide to take the tree down.
Yeah. Well, that's actually a perfect segue into my next question, which is how do you generally decide when a tree needs to be removed? Like, what are the factors in that decision?
A lot of times the tree will tell you when it's not going to be viable anymore, just by looking at the way it grows or the way it's dying back. But you're also looking for, if they're on the street, there's a lot of injuries that occur over time to the base and to the trunk, and then that creates cavities over time.
Okay.
So you're always keeping an eye on, the bottom of the tree and the middle. Also, the derecho. When the derecho happened, about 8 or 10 years ago?
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, over in the town of Chevy Chase on Blackthorn, there were a lot of mature oaks. And I mean, they were like 30 inches, 24, 30 inches. And it was a very narrow median. And when it came through, a woman that lived on Aspen, that street next to it, said she could see leaves swirling. So it was like a tornadic wind.
Oh, wow.
Coming through. And the next day, they were like tinker toys. They were like 8 or 9 trees, these huge trees.
Yikes.
And they didn't cause much damage to the houses because they all fell into the street, but they were on cars and stuff. But I mean, that's when I learned there's a time when the tree's too big for the space.
Okay.
And even though it's healthy and looks okay, you need to take it out.
Yeah. More
So that's
safer-
another factor.
safer to begin with.
Yeah.
Okay. So at this point, I do have a lot more questions, but I want to open up for Q&A if anybody has questions specifically that they'd like to ask Dr. Feather. Yes.
You say sometimes a tree just tells you when it wants to die or,
When it's unsafe, yeah.
How does it?
I mean, I look at all these trees all the time, year in and year out. So then you have your eye on some of them that you think are maybe need to come out at some point.
Because do they?
Yeah, big branches start dying out of them. Or it's like the tree on this big pin oak on Warwick Place and Dorset. If you're driving that way on the right side, this huge oak. I mean, since I've been here, it's been losing branches. And large branches, always had dead wood. And then it was this year that it just becomes too much. It's, you know, if you start taking what's there off, there's not gonna be much left, you know, what's dying. So that's when it needs to come down because it's not gonna revive to what it was. And it becomes dangerous. So same thing on the end of Warwick, there's a bunch of pin oaks that eventually they start dying back, and then at some point it just, you know, they need to come down. So it's the canopy reducing is what you look at.
This is sort of a related question. It's about a specific tree in town, but it's a pine tree. It's growing
By your house.
by my house. That's why I'm so interested. But it's lost a lot of needles lately, just over this sort of change in seasons.
Yeah.
Is that a sign that we should be more aware of?
You know, this was a brutal year for trees because it
Right.
was so dry and hot. So it might just be that, but I'll take another look at that
Thank you.
one.
Actually,
So Dr. Feather, when I moved here, you know, the policy was, about 25 years ago. So we had this policy about the monoculture.
Yeah.
And then I remember maybe 10 years ago, the Parks and Natural Resources Committee recommended a change. So can you talk all about the history of that, why there was monoculture? why there was a
I
change?
think what impressed people who work in the field was just the loss on, if you're planting all one species in a town, there are some towns in the Midwest where all elm, I mean, elm trees are great street trees. They grow huge, they provide this umbrella-like canopy. They're very resistant to things. I mean, it's a great street tree. So everybody was planting, they grow fast. So there were whole towns that were wiped out. There wasn't a street tree in the town. So after, you know, you get Dutch elm disease and everybody says, well, that's not gonna happen again. But then we get emerald ash borer. I mean, there's different things that occur. Gypsy moth was another one. I think the industry decided you're better off with planting diverse selections along the street. If something happens to one of the species, you're not losing everything, you lose something you can replace, you know, without visually affecting the whole street.
So the reason why the plan was in place in the beginning is because that was like the best practice. Then?
I think it's the look they wanted.
Oh,
I think it's aesthetic and it was an easy tree to grow. So they just went with that. It was, you know, it was like a no-brainer for them. And then when they got wiped out, then people start sitting down and thinking.
thank you.
so why is it that different tree, like why, if there's a disease that comes in, why are some trees affected and some are not?
It's just their
It's just-
genetic makeup.
Okay, interesting.
So there's there are insects and pests that attack all trees,
Okay.
but the most serious ones are specific,
Okay.
which is interesting. Like Japanese beetle, well, Japanese beetle doesn't eat every tree, but it has a wide host range. I guess ambrosia beetle gets on oaks and maples. But that's pretty much for smaller limbs and smaller trees.
Okay.
But the most serious diseases are usually pretty specific.
Mr. Barry?
Thank you for your expertise. Could you tell us more about the wood? I mean, Somerset wood is unusual, I believe. First of all, its existence is unusual, but then I believe the wood itself is unusual. Could you tell us something about it? And also, I know there's been a lot of work on the trees there now, with new parts being cut and so on. Could you tell us more about what you're doing with the wood?
With the wood,
With the wood, yeah.
yeah, the wood gets recycled.
I don't mean just individual trees, but the body of wood, constituting the Somerset wood. forest. The forest.
Oh, the forest. I always say, I was saying before, if you didn't mow a lawn, this would be forest. I mean, this would be, this area of Maryland wants to be woods. I mean, it would, when the, you know, probably when the first indigenous people came here, it was woods.
Right.
So, it's not too hard to grow the trees here. It's not like in the Southwest, you're trying to grow trees that are introduced from a lot of them are East Coast or West Coast, but you have to really take care of them. You got to water them all the time. Anything you don't water in the Southwest dies. Here, you're planting stuff that is adapted to here. Once it gets established, you don't have to really worry about water or anything like that. So, I mean, you're managing a forest on the street here, essentially what I'm doing. I mean, it's the same thing, only it's you lined it up in between a sidewalk and a curb. So, but I mean, it's not hard to grow trees here. It's easy. Compared to where I come from, the Southwest, it's very hard to grow a tree there. You have to maintain it all its life. Here you can plant it, you prune it. That's pretty much all you do. So you are maintaining. I mean, everybody said you're living in a forest. The town is living in a forest. I mean, there's trees by every house. So I mean, you are living in a forest.
And the main species of trees in our forest are what?
A lot of tulip poplar. There's a lot of American beech along the creek. There's hickories, and a lot of oak, red oak, and some white oak. And that's pretty much what it is on this whole area in southern Montgomery County.
Lucy, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I have another question about continuing about the monoculture. So first of all, you had talked about sugar maple, but I was wondering if you would be, if we're going to no longer have monoculture and just have a variety of species, if you'd be willing to plant some sugar maples.
We do plant sugar maple,
You do.
but we plant varietal. So it's not the straight sugar maple. Sugar maple is actually native to Western Maryland. Western Maryland actually has one of the biggest maple syrup producers in the country. Yeah, it's not New Hampshire. I think we do more than New Hampshire in Western Maryland. So there's a lot of native, but they've developed varietal trees that sustain street conditions better. Commemoration's one, legacy's another. So there's varieties now that we can grow that have the color of the sugar maple.
Yeah, and so I used to live in a different street in Somerset, and now I live on Fallstone. And before I moved to Fallstone, I never walked on it because the trees are too little and it's too hot in the summertime and there's no shade. And so then there are a lot of these cherry trees. And are you trying to diversify Fallstone?
Fallstone, the main cherry place is Trent.
Oh, yeah, I know. Yeah.
So Fallstone does have cherries on it.
Yeah.
And mainly around Trent. That's where most of them are. I did plant some beech there on the circle side where there's no sidewalk. I think we have 3 beech trees there. So I'm trying to get those started.
Actually, the beech are canopy trees.
Yes.
Right, and it would be just great if we had canopy trees all along.
Well, there's one restriction to canopy trees. It's overhead wires.
Yes.
So we plant shorter trees where there's wires.
Yes. Part of why I never knew this until I lived on a cherry tree street. It's really hard walking dogs there. There are all those cherries on the ground.
Yeah, they do fall at one point.
They fall and the dogs like to eat them. And they get on your feet. Yeah, right. Okay, thank you.
That's true.
Yes.
Yeah, so how do you determine when plan, what type of tree to plant? Like if a cherry tree is taken out or there's space there, is there a master plan or whatever? or-
They're not a master plan per se, but the PNRC reviews the plan for the Parks and Natural Resources Committee. So, I usually, I mean, there's so few now, we're not taking out as many as we did 5 or 6 years ago. We were planting 15 or 20 at a time. Now we're doing, 10 or less. So, if it's on Trent, we usually plant another cherry. If it's under wires, then you're gonna plant something. You might plant a cherry, you might plant a redbud or a dogwood. The wires are shorter trees. And then for the bigger ones, I've been trying to scatter a lot of black gum in the past few years.
The big redbud thing,
Yeah.
create varieties of those, I'd love to see, more varieties of the redbuds.
Yeah, there's white, redbud, pink.
Yellows, the purples,
Yeah.
the reds, there's.
Well, we can consider
beautiful
those.
colors.
We'll go Nat and then Carrie.
I'm gonna make a statement first and I'll ask a question. I occasionally walk my dog, especially when Esther is either away. And I have taken a lot of pruning classes. And I walk around and I see all these suckers coming off of all these trees. My inclination is next time to bring my clippers with me, clip them, but what is the maintenance problem? Because I know that it's important to get rid of those suckers, so that
What's a sucker?
the little things that pop out on the.
Sucker
side of the
is a small branch that pops out of the base usually of a tree, or it can be up in the canopy. So we do take those off. When we prune for dead wood, if there's suckers, I have those taken off.
But what season, you do them in January or?
That you can prune a tree anytime, yeah.
Do they harm the tree, the suckers?
The suckers are actually, sometimes the suckers are produced from what they call epicormic buds. And they're buds that are deep in the wood. And if the tree's stressed, these buds become active and what they do is produce leaves quickly, like it's new growth. It'd be this big in a year and have leaves, and it's trying to get more sugar for the tree. That's in a stressed tree. So that's a different kind of bud. There are some species of trees that readily sucker. Cherry's one of them. Cherries sucker all the time.
Yeah, but maybe redbud.
Not maple, no. Redbud grows fast. Everything on a redbud's a sucker, really. But maple, not so much unless it's under stress. And so the cherries, it's not really detrimental to the cherries because they're growing fast too. And what we do is if I have dead wood I won't purposely single out a tree to take the suckers off unless I'm doing other pruning. So if I'm taking dead wood or something, there's suckers, I'll have the suckers taken off then.
When you see suckers, is that, I'm always worried about the maple that's in front of my house, and I have babied it for I don't know how long, and it's cabled, and I've had a lot of work. I think you saw it maybe, if you recall, but I was taking some trees down, but they took a lot of the limbs off of it. And then it always worried me when the suckers would come out on it, and so is it a sign of decline?
It can be. The other thing is if you top a tree, it suckers. So if you take the top off a tree, cut it, then immediately it gets all the buds come out and they make a bush. So that's a different kind of sucker growth promoted by popping. Because what happens is the tree produces a hormone in the top bud that prevents those suckers from proliferating. It's a feedback mechanism. So, but if you cut that off and there's no more chemical, then they readily sucker. And that's a defense too. In the woods, another branch can fall on top of a tree and break the top off. And then the defense is to create all this growth to maintain the energy ratio in the tree immediately. That's what sucker growth is. On cherries, they naturally sucker. So, I mean, it's not really harmful to them. They just keep going.
Carrie?
Dr. Benjamin, we're so lucky that you're part of the town.
Well, I'm lucky to be working here.
You've done terrific work, and, 20 years ago, you were so, maybe 15 years ago, you were so, helpful explaining things to my kids when they were little, and now they're up in college, but you were terrific.
Huh.
So, we all worry about climate change, and, I've read in the newspaper that trees are gonna be migrating north, because the ones, like the stuff's gonna get too hot, and then we're gonna get too hot. And so, two questions. One is, I think I asked actually a couple summers ago, should we be, during the drought, should we be watering even our big old trees? to
It's
protect them?
pretty hard to water a big tree. So it's pretty hard to make a dent. Younger
Because they need
trees,
So much.
younger trees you should, because younger trees they can benefit from watering.
But
but-
big trees, they're.
But how do you do it? I mean, if you're doing your lawn, anyway, it helps. But it's pretty hard to water like a mature tree.
Okay.
Give it enough. And they have I mean, trees are built to survive. And they stay in one place, they don't move, so they have to do that, they have to be built to survive. So, I mean, there's been the past 4 or 5 years, not so much this year, last year. And I can't remember in town if we lost, there's been a couple in private property. But several communities, we lost these huge white oak trees. Suddenly, like, and mainly in the summer, when it got dry and hot, they would just die. So that was happening all over the state. In fact, Anne Arundel County, the arborists there ran an online program. If you had one die, you could report it. And they didn't figure anything out from that. What they concluded maybe is maybe it's from the change in the rainfall, because you get these droughts and then instead of getting 2 inches at a time, now we're getting 4 and 5. I mean, that's showing up because everybody's concerned about runoff. I mean, it's changed. The amount of rainfall in one event has changed. It's more now. So they think maybe the water relations in the soil, you have these 4 or 5 instead of 2 changed and killed roots. It stayed around longer maybe, and this large tree's not adapted to that, and it dies. It kills the roots, and then when it's dry, it dies. So that was one conclusion, or one theory. The other thing is, if you replant a new tree in that spot, the same tree, then it's going to adapt to the current condition. So to me, you can still plant a white oak there, but it won't succumb to the same thing the big one did, because now it can adapt to what's happening and grow in that environment. Okay. So the same thing with the climate change. It might eventually kill older stock, but if you replant new stock, that can probably adapt to whatever the change has become.
And so when the newspaper said about trees migrating, maybe we don't need to do that, or will we get different varieties?
I don't think, we don't have a choice. I mean, we have a choice and we're not taking the choice. We do have a choice for climate change. We're not doing it though.
Right.
So essentially we're at the mercy of what's going to happen. And there are species that are, well, even in my time here in Maryland, crepe myrtles now grow in Frederick trees. And it used to be there were shrubs. And one time I called Dr. Egolf, who we did the breeding program for US Arboretum, and I was asking him about, more northern adapted crepe myrtle. He said, well, if you get up around Frederick, they're shrubs because they freeze back every year. That hasn't happened in 30 years. So now I have crepe myrtle trees at my house. When I first moved there, I couldn't. So that, I mean, it's changing pretty rapidly. Everybody in this room thought this wasn't gonna happen in our lifetimes, but I mean, just in the past 10 years, it's there. So,
So it wouldn't change what we plant, you're not gonna start planting some southern kind of tree.
I mean, that's good. Like I plant a crepe myrtle at my house.
Yeah.
So I've already adapted to it. But I think there hemlocks, like you can't grow hemlocks here anymore in the open. Because they're a northern species. They're they're in the woods in Canada. And in Frederick, there's a great hemlock grove, but it's underneath the canopy of the trees in the mountain. I mean, it's beautiful. And they're all healthy, but they're protected from the heat. So that's a species you can't grow anymore. In fact, I bet you can't find it in the nursery industry here for sale, probably. And people used to plant them in their yards as screening. I mean, there's a lot of hemlocks in the backyards here along fences. But that's something you can't grow anymore.
You mentioned some applications that you're using, the apps, and there are so many, I don't know which one are useful, so do you recommend any app?
I've used this identification app a lot.
Picture this, just picture this.
I forget what it is. Let me look here.
Picture this is very good.
Pitch, if you know one, use it.
Okay, picture
It's
the.
$30 a year.
Oh, this one's free that I'm thinking of.
Ooh, tell me a free one.
It's very good. I mean, you have to kind of be a plant person to sift through it quickly, because they'll give you a bunch of options. So I know, I've been doing this for years, so I look at the options and no, it's not that. Okay.
Yeah, I'm new, that's why I want.
So that's what's hard to use about it, is if you don't know. Like if you don't know all the options, yeah, it's tough to, because then you have to kind of research each one.
Okay.
So you have to be familiar with it, but it gives you a bunch of options.
Okay.
So that's probably easier for me. Because I just know the stuff, but. You can see how much I use it. I don't have it readily available.
But you said picture this is one that.
Picture this is good.
I don't know if anybody has any other
Yeah,
questions.
I'll find this.
Okay.
One.
And I'll start with picture then. Thank you.
Okay.
So Dr. Feather, what is the life cycle for the different breeds, types of trees we have? And what are the reasons why they, the nature of their life cycle? Because for example, you see some places in the town where you might plant 3 of the same tree in a row and one doesn't make it. So why is that? What are the different possibilities? And then also, what is the life cycle for the different trees?
The hardwood trees we have, I mean, they can grow hundreds of years. And my theory, I don't know if this is my theory. To me, if you could have a tree, a hardwood tree, that never was injured, it might grow forever. Because what really kills a tree is some injury that allows decay to enter, and that, that's usually what a tree succumbs to over time. So there are
like lightning or.
yes, lightning or another tree falling on it, or beaver damage, or So, but that's just me talking. I mean, I'd say that to other arborists, they think I'm crazy, but I mean, there's everything there. It can go forever. There's no reason why it shouldn't. There are short-lived trees. Flying cherry is one of the short-lived trees. Redbud is a short-lived tree. there's trees forestry, and land management that you know are short-lived, and what they call them is succession trees. So if a place is wiped out, or all the trees are cut down, these are the trees that come first. Like, Virginia juniper will come first. And that's why around Dulles, it's all Virginia juniper, a lot of it on cleared land. And that's just because it has very thin topsoil, and that's the first tree that can survive there. Then after the junipers grow a while, you start getting seedlings of other trees coming in, so the oaks start. So that's how that developed. But junipers are short-lived trees, Virginia juniper.
And does air pollution affect trees?
Air pollution affects trees,
Like,
some more than others. Our air pollution's gotten better. I mean, I lived in LA when you go outside in the summer and you couldn't see the tower at the center of and then China is amazing. I've been looking at pictures of that. That's almost like Riverside. And that was affecting plants. That was affecting crops. So it's very serious there because they grow a lot of crops. And they were worried about acid rain here at one time. But that's all gone because they don't burn that coal anymore in the north. So there's no more. But your question about if you plant 3 trees in a row and one dies in the center, that's an interesting thing. That can be many things. That can be the soil, the air is a little bit different. It drains more, so it's not getting water in the drought time the others are. So it can be an injury that happened to the tree. It can be a disease that got into that tree. So it can be different reasons why that happened.
Do we have any other questions?
What about fertilizing the tree?
You fertilize young trees. That's okay.
But mature trees don't need.
No, they know what they're doing. But young trees and you fertilize because you want to stimulate growth. That's the main reason. All this stuff about it makes this, and they don't know that. That's just selling. That's selling stuff. Nobody has any proof of any of those things.
Very good.
What's the most unusual or surprising thing you encountered or something that probably has some great stories or anything?
I thought this string project was fascinating that WSSC did. Not so much trees, but I mean, that was fun to work with. And it was fun to do the replanting, and that was a good project here. And it helped the stream. I mean, that stream was in trouble. They were leaking sewer pipes.
What did they do to the?
They hardened. There's a lot of see, this all makes sense too. The sewer follows the streams because it's drainage. I mean, sewer is gravity, right? Or sanitary sewer. So the final big pipes are going to follow a stream to go down to the treatment plant that's on the Potomac or wherever it is. So they have a lot of pipes here that are almost exposed. I mean, they're not very, very deep. And a couple of them, the seals broke or they broke and they were leaking sewage into the stream. So what they did is and a lot of it's erosion, the pipes were eroding out of the stream, they were getting undercut. So what they did is they hardened the stream and put more stone or raised the level to make the water come down slower or go down this way slower. And if it goes down slower, you have less erosion. So that was the idea. So I'd never seen that done before. And it was fascinating how that whole process worked. And it's beautiful. Mr. Fink, who lives he put a bench out there. He said, "You've created something great here." Because it was these little pools. And so it was a lot of fun.
And what did he put out there?
A bench, so he
a
could
bench.
sit,
Oh,
yeah.
nice.
and look at it.
Yeah, it's nice out there. I've actually seen quite a few fish.
But before it was overgrown, you couldn't even get to the stream. It was deep, it stunk. I mean, there are lots of things were going on there.
Yeah, it's a really nice location.
But is there any like proper way that was like, that area should be kind of taken care of? Cause you can have like by the pool, you look over and there's sometimes trees, I guess, have fallen over or whatever, it looks like it's kind of blocking.
Yeah, we should be. I mean, we've cut some of those. I need to walk the stream and see if there's any of those. We should cut those away, just so it doesn't flood,
Right.
because that can probably flood upstream. So we periodically clear those.
Double trunks, I know one of my neighbors, we had a derecho show on like 100-foot tree, fell for all the way from their house and landed like 6 inches from our deck.
Yeah.
And then it took 6 months to get it removed, it was so huge. But is there a policy that if you have double?
If you have a
trunks-
double trunk, it's structurally unsound. If it's a real double trunk coming from the same base, because a tree is, how a tree grows is it envelopes itself every year. So it's growing up and it's growing out. A branch here, if a branch is at your head on a tree, it's not going to get taller as the tree grows. That branch stays there. And that branch increases in size. So just think of it as a new envelope each year.
Branches don't rise with the trees?
No. There was a landscape architect one time that said, no, they don't rise with the tree.
That's so interesting.
They don't grow
The
up.
rest of the tree grows up around it?
Yeah, it's like a new envelope of wood being put on each branch and the trunk.
That's cool.
So it's built to be contiguous. That's the structurally sound tree. If it's in a V, then that middle part isn't growing right. So it's not strengthened. And if it gets heavy enough, it can split apart. So those are inherently dangerous. And if you're growing a small tree and it does that, you should cut one of those off so that doesn't develop.
Speaking of crab myrtles, I was surprised I had some work done, I would think, finally cutting things in the backyard. And they took the crab myrtles down to just like, nothing. And I was surprised, and then I remembered seeing so many of those trees that look like that. How was it? And then this summer, it just grew and was.
See, that's part of the sucker growth. That's sucker growth too. That's like you're taking the top off and then it makes a bush. So some landscapers like that. I mean, some owners, where they keep the tree short, like a crepe myrtle. Some crepe myrtles naturally grow short. You don't have to do that. But the taller ones that make trees, a lot of them come through and just take all of the new growth off. There'd just be stubs everywhere.
Yeah.
And then it all bushes back and it looks like a tree again. Like I have, at my house, I have a natchez, it's a white one, and it grows to be 30 or 40 feet. And if you like a tree and you have space for a tree, just let it grow. If you want to maintain it at a certain height, they take to that. They won't kill the tree. Some trees you do that to kill. You do that to a maple, eventually kill them. There's some there in Europe. I don't know if you all ever noticed. In Europe, they have a pruning technique called pollarding, and it was used to get firewood. It was used to harvest that growth that came off. After 2 or 3 years, they would harvest that and use it as kindling. That was how it first started. Now in the streets, they actually maintain trees that way. So there's some trees that take to that. Tilia, linden, you can do that. London plane or sycamores, you can do that. Something like a maple, you can't. That'll kill it. But what they do is come through and do the same thing on the crepe myrtle. They top it, then it sprouts out. And then what they do is when they cut the sprouting off, they cut it back to a nub. They don't cut it like this again. They trim all the little branches back and it starts to make a knot. And then all the sprouts come off of that, a callus.
Well, I also noticed that there are shoots at the bottom of the tree now, and I'm wondering if I should be chopping those off or just let them go.
Yeah, that, you mean on the crepe myrtle?
Yeah,
I'd probably take those off. Just because you want it up and down. If you want a bush, a complete bush, you leave them. If you don't, you cut them off. But you can't hurt a crepe myrtle. You can cut it to the ground and come back up.
And if you wanna see a miracle, come to my house, there's a Japanese maple in the front yard. And after one of the big snows, 20 or 30 years ago here, the tree actually split. Jonathan Dawkins was the person that was here. And he came in and he put it back, he said to me, Nat, I'll do this, he said, I'm doubtful that it's gonna work, but we'll do it, and that was 20 years ago. And you should see that thing, it's that, and you can still see where he
Grafted it together.
bed it together. So miracles do happen, folks.
No, trees are adaptable. Trees want to live. So they're survivors.
So go ahead. Thank you. Oh, yeah, one last question. Yeah.
There's new ideas, I guess, that maybe it's not new to you, but the trees are walking underground.
Oh, yeah.
Sharing information.
That's a fairly new idea. Alex Shigo, who was the big innovator for caring for trees, maintaining trees as far as pruning. He actually discovered how a small branch attaches to a main branch. And he was a research scientist in New Hampshire with the USDA. And Esau was a professor at Connecticut. And she wrote the anatomy textbook for plants, Esau. And he said he was walking through the woods and picking up twigs and that were alive, or he'd take twigs that were alive, and he would take the branch that was coming off and strip it down. And he noticed it comes out, there's a ball, okay, on the end of the twig that he pulls off. So what it is, it's a ball and socket, kind of. And the way Esau drew it was just like a V. Like all the xylem and phloem just came out like a V. But what happens, it's a ball and socket, and then the growth wraps around the ball from the main stem, and that creates the strength for that branch. So he started looking at branches that way, and what we were doing in the 70s were flush cutting trees. When we pruned a limb off, we were cutting all the way to the bark and even into the bark of the main trunk. And he discovered that if you did that, that was an introduction for pests and diseases. So what he saw was there's a little growth. If you go home and look, and it's on maples, it's pretty obvious. There's a little swelling at where the little branch meets the trunk. There's a little swelling. You cut just in front of that swelling, and the swelling has active tissue in it that can grow over the wound. If you're cutting flush, there's no way to get that. It becomes a decay. So he always said that trees communicated by mycorrhizae, because in the forest there's fungus, mycorrhizae are fungus that are beneficial to the tree because they gather nutrients and sometimes water and give to the tree. They're actually in the mantle. They make a mantle in the root. If you pull up a maple tree like a seedling, you'll see the soil sticks to the roots. It's not smooth and it's hard to get off. That's mycorrhizae that has soil and it's stuck to the root. So it makes an organic. It combines organically with the tree, and then the mycorrhizae benefits because it's getting sugar from the tree, from the roots. So Dr. Shigo was saying there's probably communication between the mycorrhizae because they make these mats in the forest. And then and there's proof now that trees do communicate. If there's a pest or something far off, the trees in this area start producing more alkaloids in the leaves to protect. That's been proven. So there is communication, but it can be by air too. It's all chemical. I mean, they're not talking, but they're reacting to each other. One's sending something out and the other one's receiving it. And so it's both under soil and in the air. Everybody thought that was ridiculous not too long ago, but it's not. It's true.
Great, well, thank you everyone for coming, and thank you, Dr. Feather, for coming, taking the time out of your busy day.
Sure.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Hold on a second. So just, I want to thank you for putting this together, but can you also explain to us about the, our town's tree city designation and how this is connected?
Yeah, so
Research.
for those of you that don't know, Somerset is a tree city, which is something that we're granted every year that we apply for. And a lot of the things that are required for that, we obviously do. We have, we take care of our trees, we spend money on our trees, and one of those requirements was to have an Arbor Day event. So I was really excited to post this and do this. I think going forward, we'll probably have it sometime in the spring for our next Arbor Day events. And it's really exciting that Somerset will continue to be a tree city, tree town for the future. Yeah.
You will be having spring, Dr. Feather, to take us around